Oh man, you know what sounds good right now? Thunderblade! Sonic the Hedgehog compilations. I have a soft spot for these things just because of how many have come out and how I keep buying them. Whenever one is announced, I honestly get really excited, even though it's like, yeah, I can play Sonic 1 whenever I damn well please. Many of these compilations are so damn different in terms of the games included, the presentation, the quality of the emulation, or graphical fidelity, or control, whatever. These are all different, and in some cases, I can kind of come up with excuses to own each and every one of them. Except you. Sega Smash Pack Volume 1 on Dreamcast. This is such a bizarre release. It was one of the last games Sega released for the Dreamcast, and the amount of games included is really strange. It's kind of this hodgepodge of mostly Genesis games, but like a couple of games that are like, oh man, Virtual Cop 2. I mean, that's a full-on 3D light gun shooter. And then Sega Swirl, which Sega Swirl was like this really bizarre, simplistic puzzle game that really reminds me of games that were included on like cable boxes. I remember like I had like a Time Warner cable box or something back in the day, or maybe it was like DirecTV, and there was like a button on the remote for like, oh, play game, and it would have like a very, very simple like puzzle maze type game available that would, you know, just be so damn simplistic. And Sega Swirl reminds me of that. But it does include Sonic 1, and it sounds like ass. The sound quality in the Genesis games is just very off. Sounds that sounded more organic in the Genesis sound like noises from like a calculator now. It's like a fine, just way to play, I guess. Like, it's not like you're not playing Sonic 1 by playing Sonic 1 and Sega Smash Pack Volume 1, but still, it's just something where I'm like, just don't play it. And for being labeled as Sega Smash Pack Volume 1, there was no Volume 2. Well, technically speaking, there were multiple Sega Smash Packs, mostly on the PC. There was also a Sega Smash Pack on the Game Boy Advance, which included Sonic Spinball, Echo the Dolphin, Golden Axe. Great. That is the most depressing road trip. But there was never really a Sega Smash Pack Volume 2 on consoles. Even then, Sega Smash Pack on the PC, like the first one is different from Sega Smash Pack Volume 1 on the Dreamcast. Like, it doesn't have Sonic 1, it just has Sonic Spinball, and then Sega Smash Pack 2 has Sonic 2. So yeah, just because I have a lot of social anxiety about people saying I wouldn't shut the f up about Sega Smash Pack Volume 1, let's move on. This right here, this is my little baby. This is one of the games that I'm the most nostalgic for. It's Sonic Mega Collection on the GameCube. I think a lot of people were the same way, where this was their introduction to the original Sega Genesis Sonic the Hedgehog games. Now, I originally had a Sega Genesis when I was little. It was a hand-me-down from my cousins, and I had Sonic 1 for that. I also had Sonic 2. And when I got a GameCube, I remember walking through Toys R Us, and I think my mom pointed out Sonic Mega Collection because she knew that, you know, I had Sonic 1 and 2 on the Genesis, and suggested this. Now, in hindsight, it would have made sense if I would have gone something like maybe like Sonic Adventure or Adventure 2 or Heroes, just because, like, you know, I didn't have those games. I already had Sonic 1 and 2, but this was just an easier, more fun way to play them, in my opinion. At least at the time, you know, when you're like 6 years old, you don't give a damn about emulation quality. But even then, the way these games are represented here are brilliant. They feel wonderful on a GameCube controller, in my opinion. And you get like a stacked lineup here. Sonic 1, 2, 3, Knuckles, 3D Blast, Spinball, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. I love that they have the spin-offs here as well. It just adds some variety. It's something where, you know, Sonic 1, 2, 3, and Knuckles all look fairly similar, so why not include Sonic 3D Blast? I mean, it's Sonic 3D Blast, like Jesus. But still, it adds more fun. It's something that's interesting to see. It's something interesting to pop on when you're tired of playing Sonic 2 for the billionth time. Like, even though I never got far in Sonic 3D Blast as a kid, I always like just turning it on and just dicking around in it for a little bit. Sonic Spinball and Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, I mean, I played those a decent amount in this collection, but like, I never got them. Sonic Spinball always made me feel like an idiot for not getting far in it. I mean, it's pinball, come on. I do think Sonic controls quite well with a GameCube controller. That just might be because, you know, like I grew up with this game. But I always just felt like with Sonic really only using like one button, just having that big green A button on the GameCube controller just felt right for Sonic. And Sonic's one of those 2D platformers that, in my opinion, I don't really think needs a D-pad. I think it works fine with like an analog stick like the GameCubes. So overall, I felt like this felt like a very natural way to play these classic games. But I don't give a shit about that. It's all about the presentation of this collection, which is really strange. I'm not sure if it's necessarily like, oh man, the presentation is fantastic, or I'm just nostalgic over it. Because looking at the menu setup, they don't really feel like, oh man, this is Sonic. I mean, there's like this weird film strip aesthetic. It's just like, okay, it looks aesthetically nice, but it's also like, what does that have to do with Sonic? These are video games, not movies. So even though like the menu setup doesn't really like absolutely 100% scream Sonic, it just feels good. Like there's so much that just feels so nostalgic about it. And I know I'm nostalgic over this collection in particular, but you know, like a lot of the music just felt like oddly like going down memory lane-esque, especially when you were going through all the bonuses, like all the manuals and comic covers and all of that. And that's another main thing. This includes so many like images to scour through, specifically covers from the Sonic comics, which are like, Jesus Christ. I knew nothing about that comic as a kid. I still really don't know much about the Sonic comic, but like, I just remember looking at so many of those covers and just kind of envisioning what the hell these were about. And they also had a lot of movies to go through. They had Sonic CDs opening and ending cutscenes without having Sonic CD itself. Turns out I believe Sonic CD was planned for this collection, but you know, they saved it for later. CD always feels like an odd omission to me. Usually when they talk about the classic Sonic titles from this era, it's oftentimes like skipped over, but sometimes it's not. Like I remember in the Sonic Mania like pre-order trailer, they had like those elevator buttons, or even in the Sonic Mania opening cutscenes, they had the elevator floors labeled, and it was supposed to be a reference to like, oh man, you know, we went to floor 1, 2, 3, K, and then M for Mania, but they didn't include CD or even like floor C. That just felt like it would have been an easy one to you know, to include. And even in a game like Sonic Generations, a game hell-bent on just celebrating every single one of the mainline Sonic titles, Sonic CD is represented, but only in like a boss stage. You don't get like a full level from Sonic CD recreated like Sonic 2's Chemical Plant Zone was, or Sonic and Knuckles' Sky Sanctuary Zone was. Sonic 3 was skipped over, but that's just because Sega considered Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles to be, you know, one game, so you know, that makes sense. So it's just kind of strange how CD is omitted sometimes, but included in others. Just a little weird to me, but either way, I mean, this is a great collection. Still one of my favorite ways to play the OG Sonic games. They've included some bonus games like Rystar and Flicky. Really enough, in Japan, they actually had some different unlockable games, or more. They had the Ooze and Comic Zone. I would have preferred that, but Rystar is cool. Rystar was another Sonic Team developed game, Sonic Team being, you know, the Sonic the Hedgehog series main developer, and Flicky is kind of there because, hey, Sonic 3D Blast, you're saving Flickies. So they have some merit there. Overall, is this the definitive way to play the Sonic games? No, I don't really think there's much reason to pick up this collection in general unless you're just kind of curious as a little oddity, but it isn't a bad way to play at all. I don't really think there's a ton wrong with this collection. I think it's quite good. It's one of the best from the GameCube era. So they expanded upon it with Sonic Mega Collection Plus on the PS2 and Xbox. I don't like this one. It's really strange to be like, oh man, I love the GameCube one, but this one, meh. You know, that probably shows my bias there in total. You know, this also isn't a bad way to play, but this just feels off to me. Completely different menu setup. They changed which music is on which menus. Some extras aren't even there. This does include more games though. You know, all the ones from the original Mega Collection are here, but they also have a bunch of Sonic Game Gear games, while also including the unlockable games from Mega Collection 1, in addition to the ones that were only in the Japanese one, like the Ooze and Comic Zone. Those are in this one. It doesn't matter if you're playing the Japanese or English versions. But man, just playing these old games in Mega Collection Plus, it just doesn't feel as good. I do feel like the emulation took a bit of a hit, Now that's coming from somebody who doesn't know jack shit about these things. But, you know, like, I just feel like I would prefer playing these games on the GameCube. And that is probably my complete bias showing. The extra Game Gear titles are pretty cool here. There's no getting around that. But the menu setup, just the overall, just coziness of this collection isn't there as much. It's kind of weird. But I feel like that is completely not up to me to decide. That just feels like it is my nostalgia showing. Though I have seen a few people say the same thing. But once again, I assume that is completely nostalgia based. But to show that I'm not completely biased when it came to GameCube Sonic collections, this thing is stupid. Sonic Gems collection, it took me forever to find this. I could never find this game back in the day. Whenever I'd go to a store, whenever I'd look online, I could never find Sonic Gems collection as a kid. And then I finally just said, screw it, I'm going on eBay. And I found a copy and I was just like, I'm gonna get this. And then after that, like, I can't go anywhere without seeing this game. The concept behind this collection is incredible. It's literally like, hey, let's take some weird, obscure Sonic games and let's just make a collection based entirely around that. I love that concept. I wish more series would do that. A series like Castlevania, Mega Man, Contra, I don't care. Just like these old school series from the 80s and 90s, just releasing a collection that just focuses on the more obscure titles. That is so damn cool. They did nothing with it. What this was pretty much just an excuse to re-release Sonic CD. That's it. They took it out of Sonic Mega Collection, I assume, because, you know, they just wanted to get that game out in time, and Sonic CD is a little more different and a little more demanding than the regular Genesis Sonic titles, so they just were like, all right, let's just not have Sonic CD in that collection. But then they were like, all right, well, let's put it in this collection. And yeah, this was pretty much the way to play Sonic CD back in the day. It was pretty much the only way until the Xbox Live Arcade and PlayStation Network versions came out in 2011. This was pretty much how you'd play Sonic CD throughout the 2000s. So, I mean, for that, this collection deserves some props. But just call it Sonic CD and Friends, for God's sakes. Don't try to make it like, oh man, weird Sonic games, because overall, like 3 games, that's pretty much the headliner for this collection. And those games are Sonic CD, Sonic the Fighters, and Sonic R. You can tell they were just scrambling for other things, like it's just like, okay, Sonic R. When you hear the theme of this collection is hidden gem, obscure games, you'd expect stuff like Knuckles Chaotix or Sonic Crackers, Sega Sonic the Hedgehog or something. There's so many games that just weren't re-released up to this point. Hell, some of them have still not been re-released. And it just kind of feels like their idea for this collection was so much grander than what it became, because, you know, like, there were so many games that they could have included, but they just decided to just whittle it down to these 3 titles. And for the most part, you know, it's fine. You know, Sonic CD was cool enough on its own back in the day to kind of warrant like, oh yeah, sure, I definitely want to you know, pick this game up to try out Sonic CD. And Sonic the Fighters and Sonic R, I mean, they warrant being played. Even if you're not gonna like them, everybody has to experience those at one point or another. And very similar to Mega Collection Plus, they also have 6 extra Game Gear games. Very strange. Back in the day, these Sonic collections would almost always include like a handful of Game Gear games. Never the Master System version, which I'm just like, okay. Because the Master System version of like Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Sonic Spinball, you know, they were better. No, always Game Gear version, so whatever. But in addition to the weird lineup of titles, like the menu setup, just the overall aesthetic, it's nice, but it's not as cozy as Mega Collection 1 was. For being so focused on being a treasure chest of rare gems, Gems Collection feels a little light in terms of just cool bonus material, you know? Like, I would have loved to see, like, really in-depth looks or behind-the-scenes material on some of the more obscure Sonic games, and it just kind of feels like spillover from Mega Collection, nothing that crazy, just like, you know, okay. I definitely give this release a bit of a hard time, and that's just because of the potential it had. I feel like it had so much potential, and it just doesn't live up to it. I think the concept is amazing, but overall, when I look at the actual game and the lineup it had, and the menus and the bonus material, it's not bad by any means, but it's just, it just feels like it's lacking a couple more games or some really cool bonus material to make this the collection it was always meant to be. Just f me already. This collection always lived up to what it was meant to be. Sonic Jam. This was kind of meant to be the Sega Saturn's like Sonic release, just kind of like something to put out that was exciting, Sonic related on the Sega Saturn, because the Saturn didn't really have its own Sonic game, or at least a mainline big 3D game, or just a main new Sonic title. You know, you had Sonic 3D Blast, Sonic R, which, and then Sonic Jam, which is a collection of the 4 mainline Sonic titles from the Sega Genesis. And they put a lot into this. Those 4 games were remade for the Sega Saturn. Now, they look the damn same, but that just also means you're not going to have many issues. You know, these games were remade to work on the Sega Saturn. It wasn't like they created a Sega Genesis emulator and just dumped the files onto it. No, they recreated the games for the system. That's insane. And as much as I love Sonic Mega Collection, they just emulated those games. And, you know, I think that's kind of a phrasing that's used too much, where it's like, oh, it's just emulation. You know, like, if you can use emulation and it's going to work perfectly, you know, why not use emulation? Why put all the development time in just recreating the games from scratch? But this was in the mid-90s, you know? Like, how likely was it they were gonna make a Sega Genesis emulator for the Sega Saturn? And recreating the games meant that there's not a lot of slowdown in these games. You know, they kind of fixed all the issues from the inside out. You know, this is incredible. There's also this weird, like, difficulty mode. Like, you can switch it to easy mode, and easy mode just kind of, like, cuts stages from the games. Like, okay. But Sonic 1 includes the spin dash from Sonic 2 and onwards, which is really great. That's kind of like a standard for a lot of Sonic 1 re-releases these days, and that started with Sonic Jam. So playing the games is great in this collection. They also allow you to lock Sonic and Knuckles onto all the other games in the collection, which means you get like the Blue Sphere game that you could play by plugging Sonic 1 in. You get Knuckles and Sonic 2 by plugging that into Sonic 2, Sonic 3 and Knuckles. You know, they pretty much thought of everything back then. And not only that, but the extras in this game are phenomenal. You have Sonic World, which is a 3D overworld where you can just run around as 3D Sonic on the Sega Saturn, something that we just really weren't allowed to do. Sure, we could race as him, and we had Sonic 3D Blast, which doesn't fucking count. Nah, this was like a traditional 3D little mini open world for Sonic to roam around in, and you could walk into buildings and view behind the scenes material. You could view like old school commercials for these Sonic games in pretty damn good quality for being compressed onto a Sega Saturn disc. You had all these art files, soundtracks, like, this was the golden standard for collections. Even these days, like, you don't see many collections going to the extent that Sonic Jam did. And maybe that's because they just don't really need to. You know, back then, I think Sega really wanted to show off with Sonic on the Sega Saturn. You know, they didn't really make, like, a mainline Sonic game for the Sega Saturn, so they were like, well, we just gotta put it all into this collection. We gotta really impress people with it. Nowadays, when they make a Sonic collection, they're just like, you just want a way to play Sonic 1 again, don't you? Like, why would they do another thing like Sonic World again? But regardless, this is outstanding. I'd be lying if I said like, oh man, I love playing Sonic Jam all the time. You know, this is not my go-to way to play these games. You know, like, I'm probably not gonna play this much more after this, and I'm sure many people are the same way. You're probably just gonna play Sonic 1 in the most convenient way, or in ways that include, you know, Sonic 1 in widescreen and with extra features and extra characters playable in it. You know, Sonic Jam doesn't really offer that, but I think everybody can look at this and just appreciate how amazing this was for not only the time, but even nowadays, just how much love was poured into this collection. Love that we didn't really see in other Sonic collections for the longest time. And even then, there's a debate that even like the collections that received that similar amount of love, you know, there's a debate that's like, hey, well, Sonic Jam still did it better. So yeah, this collection is a lot of things. One of the best Sonic collections, one of the best Sega Saturn games in general. It was definitely one of the best collections during the 90s and even into the 2000s. This is one of the greats. This is a great way to waste time. Sonic Classic Collection was a game I really wanted back in 2010 when this initially launched. This is very similarly a collection of the 4 Sega Genesis Sonic the Hedgehog games, 1, 2, 3, and Knuckles, just like Sonic Jam. You know, in 2010, we've already had a lot of Sonic collections up to this point. that I think really showed how lacking this was in comparison. This just kind of felt like something Sega kind of farted out for a cheap buck. You know, a couple years before this, on the DS's competing platform, you got the Sega Genesis Collection on PSP, which, you know, was a port of Sega Genesis Collection on the PS2. And this included 28 games, plus videos, arcade games. It says wireless multiplayer action. Like, there was a lot going on here. And this included Sonic 1 and 2, so you pretty much got half of this collection in here. But of course, the DS is different from the PSP. It's not as capable, but you know, these are, you know, older games. I think they probably could have fit in like a couple more things in here, maybe a few more games or just more features, because what this game pretty much just has is these 4 games and then like an image gallery, and that's it. Now, the games themselves, they play perfectly fine on the DS. The orientation of the screen, like the screen size is kind of weird. Like the UI of like the score and the time and all of that in the top left corner, it just looks bizarre. Like it's strange. But when it comes to playing, you know, these classic Sonic titles on the go, this sufficed. And that's all I really felt like Sonic Classic Collection was aiming to do, just giving you a way to play the Genesis Sonic games on the DS. That was pretty much all it was meant to do. It was obviously a budget release. I believe even like the menu music used in Classic Collection was just ripped straight from Sonic Jam. So it's not bad, but in comparison to other collections, it's just mediocre. Like, playing the games works fine here. They feel good. It is definitely way better than Sonic Genesis on the Game Boy Advance, which is one of the worst ways to play Sonic 1. And in many cases, Classic Collection kind of felt like an apology for that Game Boy Advance version. You know, hey, not only do you get Sonic 1, but you get 2, 3, and Knuckles, and they played pretty damn okay here. But like I said, you know, we've had much better values when it comes to playing handheld Sonic 1, 2, and other Sega Genesis titles in the past, which, you know, the Sega Genesis Collection on PS2. This is okay. It's just another in the line of generic Sega Genesis collections. At the time, this was pretty good, but, you know, it's obviously been eclipsed now. There's literally no reason to go back to this. I think the PSP version is pretty damn cool, mainly just because I've been getting more and more into, like, the PSP lately, and just playing a game like this on the go, especially back in the day when this actually released, like, that's pretty damn cool. And looking at this is something where it's just like, why would you buy like Sonic Mega Collection Plus on the PS2 when you could get the Sega Genesis Collection and it already included Sonic 1 and 2 plus, you know, 26 other games. You know, you weren't getting Sonic 3 and Knuckles and 3D Blast and Spinball and Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, but it's like, you got columns instead. But Sega always puts out these generic Sega Genesis collections, and each one kind of eclipses the last, so it's something where, at least with Sonic Mega Collection, like, you know, you get like just that nice cozy feeling with it. The Sega Genesis Collection, I mean, like, why would you play that when you could just play Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection on the 360 and PS3? This is one of the all-time greats right here. I love the overall aesthetic here. Of course, they cram Sonic in the title and on the box art to just kind of sell it a little better. Like, what about this makes it Sonic's? But this goes from 28 Sega Genesis games to over 40. And this includes pretty much all the Sonic titles you could ask for. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, Knuckles, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, 3D Blast, Spinball, it's all here. And then in addition to that, all the other Sega Genesis games you'd really want. Well, not all of them, there's a couple missing, like Gunstar Heroes, that's one that's missing. They don't have Echo Jr. Damn. But they have so much stuff in here, and then in addition, they also have arcade games, Sega Master System games that can be unlocked. They have video interviews, all these unlockables. It's really cool to kind of go for like achievements on these games. I will say though, like the picture quality of the games has always like been a little fuzzy, have always been a little blurry, you know? I believe it's bilinear filtering where the sprites just aren't as crisp as they could be. That's something I feel like they did a lot back during the 360 and PS3 days with these classic games that thankfully seems to have kind of gone out of fashion, or at the very least has kind of been turned into an option where you can kind of pick between bilinear filters, which are a little more blurry sprites, or just these very pixel perfect crisp graphics, which I definitely prefer. But this has always been one of my favorites. I love the overall aesthetic here. It just looks classy. This is lame as hell. Sega Genesis Classics on PS4, Xbox One, and it also came out on Nintendo Switch. Yeah, I don't really like this one. You know, the value is definitely there. You know, hey, over 50 games. There is more titles here than with Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection. Unfortunately, though, they don't have Sonic 3 and Knuckles. This was released after Sega was kind of getting cold feet with re-releasing those because of the music copyright issues. But you know what I just really don't like about this game? The damn menu setup. It just looks tacky. It looks so cheap and so budget. It looks just so amateurish. I just don't like it. Like, if you don't have the budget to do like a really nice looking, you know, 90s room, you know, just don't do it. Do what Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection did and just do like a standard 2D menu with nice graphic design, nice 90s, 80s-esque graphic design. Instead, they put a little too much effort into this when they really shouldn't have, because they didn't have the time or budget to make it look as good as it really could have. And it just kind of gets some small little details wrong. Like, they have this whole big shelf of Sega Genesis games, and like pretty much none of the spines and artwork is like accurate. Like, they just kind of had a stock Genesis template for the box art and just kind of smacked each of these game logos on them, and just that's supposed to be like, yep, that's your game selection. And again, it's like something where I'm like, I appreciate the sentiment, but it's just like, if you're gonna do something like that, actually do something like that. Don't just kind of cheap out and just kind of apply a template to everything, you know, like use the actual game box art. And because of the room setup that they have, a lot of times like they do this whole like whatever like lighting cycle of like, oh man, it's nighttime, so like it's a little darker, and because of that, it's hard to read some of the games on the shelf. Like, it's too dark, or the shadows are too much or something. I'm just like, come on, guys. I don't know why. It's just kind of like, this one, it's not a bad collection. It's not, but I just prefer the Xbox 360 and PS3 version. And this one has its problems too, you know, like this one does have the filtering issues where the graphics look a little blurry. This one doesn't have that. But also, yeah, this one does have Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles, but you can't like lock them into each other. Yeah, both of the games, though, you're not gonna do that. Like, it just feels like it's, why didn't you even think about doing that? So yeah, I wouldn't say this is a bad value at all. I think this is a great value. You know, over 50 Sega Genesis games, you can't go wrong with that. However, I just prefer the original one right here, even if this one does have more games technically. Now this one, you know, I'm a little conflicted on. It's the Sega 3D Classics Collection, which includes a bunch of the 3D remakes of games Sega put out on the Nintendo eShop for the Nintendo 3DS. And when I say 3D remakes, I mean in the vein of they took these games and they put them out on 3DS, and they have, you know, a bunch of new extra features, but, you know, by and large, they still look the same, but they're in stereoscopic 3D now. Nintendo did a very similar thing with their own lineup of 3D classics, where they did, you know, Urban Champion. But Sega went hog wild on the 3DS with their own 3D classics releases, and Sonic was one of them. But this release, while it is very, very cool and has a lot of great stuff on it, it feels a little limiting. Like, they had a ton of 3D classics, and this only includes, you know, like a handful. There are some 3D classics that are exclusive to this release, like a couple of unlockable games. Like, you know, they have 2 right here that are just bonuses. And I'm very happy that, you know, they preserved these games in the form of a physical release. I just wish they kind of included more. And the fact that these were games that were already available before this and are just, you know, it's just a physical collection of games that were already released via the Nintendo eShop before, you know, it's just not super exciting to me. And by the time this released in 2016, I already had all the Sega 3D Classics games that I really wanted at that point, so I just didn't really feel a need to buy this until a few years later down the line when I found it used at a store. But I will give this collection this. The fact is, they actually went for like a different variety of Sega games. I really like that. I played Power Drift on here, and I never played Power Drift before, and I'm like, damn, this is really fun. It's a really good arcade game from Sega back in the day, and the 3D remake on 3DS is really damn cool. The version of Sonic 1 here, it's good, you know? Like, I can't really say like, oh man, they ruined Sonic. No, it's just Sonic 1, but, you know, with stereoscopic 3D. You know, I have the spin dash available, so, you know, that's great. But overall, it's more so a way to play Sonic on the 3DS with kind of a neat little 3D effect, rather than the definitive way to play. And before we get to the final one, I want to talk about, you know, I can't go without mentioning these 6-pack and Sonic classics on the Sega Genesis. There, I mentioned them. Sonic Origins, man, the latest Sonic collection. This one has had a bit of controversy surrounding it. Yeah, it released in a state where it had a fair amount of bugs and glitches. Some things just didn't really work properly. In the behind-the-scenes portions of this game, you know, like the museum and whatnot, they had some mislabeling, where some music tracks and pieces were mislabeled as the wrong thing. The pricing structure of this whole deal was kind of criticized, where, you know, the base game was $40, but for some reason Sega felt the need to do like a digital deluxe version for $5 extra, where you got like a couple extra random things that were completely superfluous. And then the fact is, they had to redo some of the Sonic 3 music tracks, and they reused the PC version of Sonic 3's music in certain stages, and they kind of recomposed them to be Sega Genesis-esque, and a lot of people did not like that. Of course, the PC version was back from way in the 90s when Sega would do PC releases of some of their major games. And Sonic 3 and Knuckles had like some really bad music on the PC back in the day, but it turned out that a lot of the music that was different from the Sega Genesis release in terms of composition, that music was actually from the original prototype of Sonic 3. Like, that was the original music composed for Sonic 3, but then they actually went in and recomposed it with Michael Jackson and whatnot, and that's why it has some copyright problems these days. So in order to re-release Sonic 3 and Knuckles in the modern day, Sega just said, alright, we're just gonna give some stages in Sonic 3 those old tracks. We're gonna recompose them in kind of a 16-bit Genesis style. They don't sound ideal, and a lot of people really didn't like that. Couple that with how a lot of people say how, like, oh man, you know, like I can just play a ROM hack of Sonic 3 and Knuckles and get that widescreen version and all of that, and you know, I don't blame them there. There are better ways to play these games. But officially, you know, this is pretty up there. I really enjoyed my time with this collection. It does have its issues. I don't think it's perfect. I think it's kind of stupid how Sega ignored some issues, you know, they just went about it in a certain way. The only way you could play these games in widescreen in Sonic Origins was playing in anniversary mode where you don't have lives. And I'm just like, why are you putting this very specific limitation onto your game? Why can't I just pick between, hey, can I play in widescreen or just play in 4x3? Why can I only pick between playing 4x3 with lives or playing widescreen without lives? Like, why can't I just toggle an option on or off? You know, why can't I play as like Knuckles in Sonic CD? That's like the only game that he's not playable in. I'm just like, I understand he wasn't designed for that game and that game wasn't designed for him, but it's also like, I don't really understand why not, you know? And in addition, I feel like the game isn't as crisp as it could be. It does appear to have like a bilinear filter on it, which does kind of blur the graphics a bit. It's not that bad, but it's just something where I'm kind of like, this game could look a little crisper, you know? And it's not like these games have never been in widescreen before. Sonic 1, 2, and CD have all gotten widescreen remasters released on mobile and on Xbox Live Arcade in the case of Sonic CD. Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 have only ever been on like mobile and widescreen, but those games were like free with ads or like $1 or $2 a piece. So to then take these games and re-release them for like 40 bucks, you know, it's kind of like, come on, man. However, I really enjoyed my time with this collection. I'm sorry. They have like a cool challenge mode. It's really neat. It was just really fun to go through, even if it was kind of piss easy. It's great to get Sonic 3 and Knuckles on modern platforms. And yeah, honestly, the new music that they have for certain stages, it's not the entire game. It's just like a few little stages here and there. Yeah. It's not amazing, but I don't think it ruins the game. I don't think it ruins those stages. I don't think it's like ear-gratingly worse. It's just not great replacements. I don't really understand why they kind of cheaped out on the music there. I do feel like there are so many talented composers that Sega has worked with in the past that if they just said, hey, can you make just this bitchin' new music for Ice Cap Zone or Carnival Night Zone, they would have been like, oh yeah, give me like a week on that and I'll give you something incredible. Instead, it kind of feels like they cheaped out and they went in a very, very basic and simple way, which is just kind of to make those old PC versions of the songs just kind of like Sega Genesis E, but in a very basic way. And I would have really loved if they included some of the spin-off titles like Sonic Mega Collection did. You know, I think it would have been great to get Sonic 3D Blast, Spinball, even Dr. Robotnik's Mean Beam Machine, because those games are referenced here. They have all these cool little 3D islands on the menu, and Spinball and 3D Blast islands are shown as some of the menu screens. I would have loved if those games would have been included, and they got similar enhancements like widescreen support. Now, I don't think those games would have benefited as much from widescreen support as, you know, the traditional Sonic games, but that would have been really neat. But specifically, I would have loved to see like Knuckles Chaotix from the Sega 32X. Like, that game's never been re-released, and it would have been amazing to finally see that get like a actual re-release. Even if it was only in 4:3, if it didn't get widescreen, I would have been completely okay with that. Like, they have Knuckles Chaotix music in the museum mode. Like, you have it there. Like, why not go all the way? Please, just go all the way. It would have been great. Or even like the Sega Master System games or Game Gear titles. Like, I would have loved to see those other games represented. I do feel like a lot of collections these days are kind of going in a sense of, you know, quality over quantity. And while I do really appreciate that, you know, like, I wouldn't have mind if they just included some of those games as just cheap little emulations where it's just like, oh, a little bonus, a little unlockable. Hey, you can play the Game Gear games. Hey, you can play the Master System games. Hey, you can play some arcade games here and there. Just these little emulations, or just reusing older versions, like taking Sonic the Fighters from the Xbox Live Arcade and PlayStation Network and just throwing it on here. No extra enhancements. It's just basically that port of the game just brought over to modern platforms. Of course, that would take more work than it really seems with me saying, but still, I would have loved to see that. So yeah, Sonic Origins is not perfect. It does have some flaws, and I really hope eventually they do a Sonic Origins Plus, like they did with Sonic Mania Plus. I would love to see that, where they include more games, and, you know, they include more behind-the-scenes material, bonus material, more challenges, all of that. In the state that it was in when it launched and the months that followed, I think it was fine. I would have loved if it was amazing. It had the potential to be that way. It's like they created these brand new animated cutscenes and they looked gorgeous. And like, they didn't need to do that. But I wish they would have like put that effort in everywhere else. And it's obvious that they wanted to. But, you know, I wish that the collection was a little more fleshed out, had a little more in it. Because as it is, it does kind of feel like, you know, Sega creating a collection of like games that they've already done on like mobile devices. So it's not like it's like, oh man, finally Sonic 2 in widescreen. Like, I'm so happy to spend like, you know, technically like $10 on it if we're going like on a per game basis in this collection. You know, it's 4 titles, even though it's like 5 if you want to count Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles as separate games, but this game doesn't. But even then, like, why can't I play as Sonic 3 or Sonic and Knuckles separately? I can only play as them as one game. You son of a bitch! Welp. What you just saw was a video recorded in like 2022 or something along those lines. See, this video was originally released as a timed exclusive in the Scott the Woz Collectible Trading Cards Series 1. And, you know, I mean, these have been coming out publicly, but, you know, unfortunately, I can't rest just releasing this video as is. I have to talk about this fucking guy, because, yeah, since then, we got a physical release of Sonic Origins, and not just that, a plus version of it with more content, which is nice. This happened. To be honest, like, it is a little deflating, I think is the best way to say. It's like, it is really strange how like they really were just going beat by beat the same exact release strategy as Sonic Mania, you know, digital only, and then we do a physical release that's called Plus, and it includes more content. And if that content is actually worth a damn,
That's for you to decide. I'm not really sure it is.
It's okay. So, I mean, like, firstly, the physical release is the main star of the show here. Just the fact that, like, hey, you know, we get a physical box release. That's always nice. I had no problems buying Sonic Origins digital when it was digital only. But, you know, I mean, this is the kind of thing that is very cool to have, like, a physical copy of. But you know what really stinks about this? It's the fact that all of the Plus content is still a digital download. The disc itself only contains, like, a normal-ass Sonic Origins. If you want the Plus content, you put in this download code. I mean, like, it could be a lot worse. It's not like the Plus content is really like, oh my god, that necessary. But it still just feels kind of weird, you know, the fact that Sonic Origins Plus launches, and a big hook is the fact that this is a physical release, and the Plus part of that package is still not a part of the physical release. You know, that's a little strange. You get an art book here, which, you know, it kind of follows that weird-ass Sega thing they do, where, like, pretty much all of, like, their major Sonic releases, or even, like, Super Monkey Ball releases, come this way, where you get this slipcover, and then they include, like, a little extra booklet that is just kind of, like, lazily sitting here within the slipcover. And I'm just kind of wondering, like, why not just make it so this book fits inside of the actual case? Now, obviously, the answer to that is because this is, like, a multi-platform release that's also coming out on Nintendo Switch, where, you know, the game cases for that are, you know, like, significantly smaller. So, you know, like, they obviously don't want to produce, like, oh, all of these art books that's, like, supposed to fit in the PS5 case, and then they have to print entirely new art books to fit in the Switch case. That's kind of a logistical nightmare. It makes it way more expensive to do that than just producing, like, one booklet for all of the platforms. But at that point, I'm kind of wondering, like, at least, why not just make the booklet fit within the case of, like, the PS5 games, and then have the Switch release have to do this funky-ass thing where it has the slip cover and you have, like, the booklet lazily fitting in there. You know, just punish the Switch owners for having a game console with a weirdly shaped case, but it's just, like, for stuff like the PS5 and Xbox, like, just, come on, just let me fit this in the case. I hate how this lazily fits on my shelf, and, like, I always have to, like, make sure that, like, oh yeah, the art book is just lazily fitting in there. This is a really dumb thing to complain about, but you know me. I find the art book to be kind of like a bit of a pointless addition. It is cool, you know, like, we have a lot of, you know, classic concept art and everything. Some of this is definitely more so, like, you know, the modern classic Sonic done by, like, Tyson Hess. So, you know, we have, like, a model sheet for, you know, classic Sonic and, like, something like the Origins opening animation. And then, you know, we have, like, some more original concept sketches, like, you know, when Sonic was meant to be a, you know, that. Which is cool. I feel like they kind of included that, not just because that's, you know, obviously a part of Sonic's concept history, but also because, you know, they included that rabbit costume in Sonic Superstars, which released the same year as, you know, Sonic Origins Plus. You know, they have Tails, Knuckles. To be honest, like, this art book is, you know, a nice little bonus, but it's also kind of just, like, whatever, you know? Like, I'm sorry, this just isn't very interesting. Like, I could pull these off of Wikipedia and just make this in, like, 20 minutes. And even then, saying 20 minutes, that's a stretch. I could probably do it in, like, 10. Yeah, like, so much of this is just like, oh, here's all these Game Gear covers. Here's, like, it's like, what? So they show, like, the reversible covers from the different regions, but I'm just kind of like, I know what the US regional cover looks like. I can just open up my game case and, like, boom, there it is. And then they show, like, all these things. These are, like, from, like, the Sonic the Hedgehog screensaver from, like, the 90s. So, it's cute that these are included, but I'm also going to be honest here, like, it's kind of dumb because, like, these pieces are all included in the actual Sonic Origins game. So I'm just like, at this point, like, show me something I can't get in this package otherwise. We get some concept sketches. These are really cool. You know, we get, like, the half pipe from Sonic 2. That's pretty neat, and, like, all these little sketches, that's really cool. I'm gonna be honest, this art book is kind of pointless. It's pretty worthless. Like, it's kind of a cute little flip through, but, like, there's really not much meat to this whatsoever. The reversible cover is kind of cute, too. You know, you kind of have, like, a Sega Genesis
style packaging here. Very much reminiscent of like Sonic 2, especially with like the checkerboard there and like the back there. I think this art is really cute. It shows like Amy with the CD, because she's from Sonic CD, Tails with the Game Gears, you know, Knuckles with Sonic 3 and Knuckles. It's really neat. I think, you know, that's a very cute reversible cover, but at the end of the day, the physical release is just kind of nice to have because it's a physical release. It's nice to actually own a copy of Sonic Origins, even though, you know, people are going to preserve the game somehow. You know, you can go on the Internet Archive or whatever in 20 years and be able to download the game, even if they delist it. It is nice to know there is a physical release that's out in the open now. You know, you can eventually buy it on eBay if you want to. That is always good to have. But when it comes to the plus aspect of this, let's talk about that. It is pretty damn worthless. They had Amy as a playable character, which I think is pretty damn neat considering that, you know, Amy has never been playable in the classic games prior to this. And it's also cool because, you know, like I said, Sonic Superstars quickly followed this release, and Amy was fully playable in that with pretty much, you know, the same type of moveset that she has here, where, you know, you can jump in the game and then you jump again, and, you know, she uses her hammer as a little, like, twirl kind of thing. Pretty damn similar to the Sonic 3 and Knuckles Insta-Shield Sonic has, where you can jump and then jump again, and you have like this very small little attack you can pull off where, you know, you can have a little bit of range, you know, attack something that, you know, you might not be, you know, completely nearby. You know, it is cool, but like, you know, it is pretty easy to forget. And Amy's ability is pretty much just that. I don't really think it takes away from the fact that it is genuinely really cool that officially in like these classic Sonic games, you can play as a brand new character, one that like you've never had officially before in these games. Like, that is really neat. I think people tend to downplay a lot of stuff that happens in these games officially because of like, you know, hacks or mods or whatever, but you know, hey, let's call a spade a spade. It is really cool that in an official capacity, you know, hey, Sonic 1, 2, 3, and Knuckles CD, you know, they got a brand new playable character, you know, Amy. It's cool to have her in these games. They also added Knuckles to Sonic CD. Knuckles, strangely, like, wasn't a playable character in the original release of Sonic Origins and Sonic CD. He was playable in all the other games. I think it's just because, like, you know, the Sonic CD version in Sonic Origins was based on the Xbox Live Arcade version released in, like, 2011. So, like, they just kind of ported that over, and I guess they just didn't really account for Knuckles, I guess. I don't know. I'm not really sure if Knuckles in Sonic CD is specifically a Sonic Origins Plus feature, or if that was just added via an update. I think it might be a part of the Plus add-on. And then other than that, it's just the Game Gear games, man. You get 12 Game Gear games in this package. That seems like a big deal. And then you realize they're Game Gear games. My lord, they just keep on trying to push these things off to us, don't they? Pretty much in like most of these Sonic collections, ever since like Sonic Mega Collection Plus, like Sonic Adventure DX, Sonic Gems Collection, like they always have like these Sonic Game Gear games available. And I think they're cool to have, you know, this is definitely a massive part of Sonic's history. But you know what really stinks is the fact that like these are a massive part of Sonic's history, but there are much better versions of these massive parts of Sonic history available. So Sega had the Game Gear, and they also had the Sega Master System. The Master System released before the Sega Genesis, which, yeah, this is pretty much like the Sega 8-bit system. Their NES, basically. The Game Gear is basically just like a portable version of the Master System. So there was a lot of games that released on the Game Gear and the Master System. Difference is the Game Gear has a smaller screen. So like a game that released on the Master System and a game that released on the Game Gear, you know, comparing the two, they're both pretty much the same games, but the Master System version usually ran a little better and also had like a bigger screen to work with. So I really don't think there's an example of a game that released on both Game Gear and Master System where the Game Gear version is superior. And guess what? Most of the Sonic Game Gear games included here also released on Master System, but we don't get those versions. We get the shitty Game Gear ones. And on top of that, these games, like, they're a cute novelty. They're fun to kind of go back to and check on, but none of these games have the same staying power as something like, you know, like the actual, like, the regular classic Sonic games that you already have in this collection. So, yeah, one, there are better Sega Master System versions of all of these games that they could have included They didn't. 2, I don't really care to play these games either way, so it's just like whatever. 3, it's a little weird that like they have the Game Gear version of something like Sonic Spinball, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, but then like the Sega Genesis versions of those games aren't included. Now, those games are already available on like all of the consoles Sonic Origins is already on. So like you can get like the Sega Genesis Classics collection on PS4, and you know, you'll be able to play Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. Thank God, I was worried. So it's not like you have to include them, but it just kind of makes this package feeling complete. And going with that logic that like, oh, the game's already on this system. The original Sonic the Hedgehog and Sonic the Hedgehog 2 are already on like Nintendo Switch in like 12 different ways. So it's just like, why even bother doing this collection to begin with if it's all about like, oh, well, these games aren't available on this console already. Like most of these games were already released on all of the consoles that Sonic Origins is on. Also, there's like a bunch of other classic Sonic era stuff that they could have released in here. For example, you have Knuckles Chaotix. That's a huge one on the Sega 32X. Never been re-released. That would have been like perfect included on here. There's like Knuckles Chaotix music in the music player in Sonic Origins. Like it would have been really damn sweet. Like I think that would have validated Sonic Origins Plus if they included Knuckles Chaotix, or they even went further. Like they had stuff like Sonic R, Sonic 3D Blast on the Sega Saturn. Like that's another game that never got re-released. Hell, they could have included like Sonic Jam, just another compilation in this compilation. There's just so much stuff that I would have loved to see them include instead of just 12 damn Game Gear games, which, hey, to be fair, most of the Sonic compilations like only had like a couple Game Gear games. This pretty much has like, I think, all of them. So that's at least something. But the fact they include all of those, but like nothing else, and that's pretty much like the only main thing in this package. The fact that they proudly exclaim there's 16 classic Sonic games in here, and 12 of them are Game Gear games that are hidden in the menu. Like, it doesn't even make sense where these games are in the menu system. You go over to like the mission mode in the game select, and like then you go down and select Game Gear games. Like, it makes no sense. It's whatever. Sonic Origins Plus could have been like so much more. But overall, like when I look at the package, you know, I like this compilation. I think it's really easy to dog on Sonic Origins. Like it's not perfect. Like they could have definitely gone a lot further with it. But, like, I think we have to kind of take a look at it and respect it for what it did give us. You know, the fact that, like, here's a Sonic compilation that really went hard with a lot of things. Maybe not everything, but, I mean, just the fact that, like, we have all these awesome animated cutscenes in the game. The mission mode, that's really cool. It's just really nice to have, like, a Sonic collection that really tries to, like, be something special again. Instead of just, like, oh, you know, like, for a while there, all we were getting were, like, really basic-ass Sega Genesis collections, or like you had Sonic Classic Collection on DS, which wasn't really anything special. You know, and the fact that like, hey, they finally re-released Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and like, yeah, the music, it isn't amazing, but that's only a few tracks here and there. It's not like the entire soundtrack was replaced. And them replacing those tracks pretty much just guarantees like, all right, we're never gonna have a problem re-releasing this game ever again. Yeah, some of the songs stink now, but like, hey, it's like moving forward, Sonic 3 Knuckles is good to go. We'll never have a problem with this game ever again. And for years, we begged to have the Christian Whitehead widescreen versions of all of these games available, like, outside of mobile devices. And we finally got it. And all we can do is bitch about it. All right, guys, not a perfect release, but hey, you know what? It's fine. It's good enough. I'm pleased with it, especially because it comes with such a cool art book. Oh my God. They rotated some of the box art. This is fucking incredible.